Okay, on to part 3 of succession. Up to this point, we've covered primary succession and secondary succession. You should definitely be able to contrast in between the two of them, recognize where you might have primary succession in one example and secondary succession in another. We've also discussed a little bit of the trends that take place in the different phases of succession, whether it be how much net primary productivity is changing or how much biodiversity is changing. Now on to today's topic, which is basically why succession takes place in the first place, or how do you proceed from one stage to the next to the next. There are 3 major factors that do take a role in the rate of succession, or how it proceeds from one stage to the next, why one stage takes over versus another. And the first is something called facilitation. Facilitation is when any species ends up helping succession progress, typically making it more suitable for another species rather than even its own. Not necessarily always the case, but one example might be like lichens, all right, your pioneer species. They're in there, they're changing rock to soil basically in a simplistic sense over time. As they die after generation and begin to create that soil and break up that rock, it eventually makes way for grasses, which are your early successional stages. And those grasses then eventually replace those lichens. Now, replacement is not always necessarily the case, but that forward progression, or making the habitat now more suitable for other organisms, is a part of facilitation. Facilitation is a big important role of primary succession, but it is also a big important role of secondary succession as well too. Alright, so just a little picture to illustrate the point a little bit more, right? Our squirrels, really rats with fuzzy tails. They got good PR somewhere. Everyone's like, oh, squirrels. But really, they're just rats with fuzzy tails. But anyways, squirrels, what do? Well, they're scampering about and they're burning the ground. And what do they eat? Acorns. Alright, so a lot of them, they're burying those. They're still not exactly sure, scientists, how they remember where all the acorns they bury are. Whether it's shadows or positions of the sun or what have you. But they don't remember all of them. And in the end, some of those acorns begin to sprout in places that they buried them, including fields or yards or many other areas that aren't necessarily late succession. And your oaks and hickory and other things that they do eat tend to be late successionary seeds. So they're basically helping disperse their type of forest into regions that are not. That is to an example of facilitation. Pretty much anything that's a seed disperser typically is a facilitator. Your second factor that controls succession is something called inhibition. Inhibition is when interference competition freezes or halts succession in place. It's either interference or exploitation competition. Pardon me, I forgot exploitation competition there. But either one of them, and as long as it stops the growth of other later successional species, that would be an example of inhibition. Succession can only succeed if some kind of disturbance removes that competition from the playfield. Now I want to give you some specific examples. This happens sometimes with early successional plants and weeds. Here's just one example. This is called a horsetail weed. You see growing here, and then that's another shot of it from above when the leaves start getting a little larger. But they actually secrete chemicals into the soil that prevents germination of other seeds. So as long as it's persistent, you could have a whole field of these things, and they're growing, they're going to keep other plants from coming in and beginning to sprout and grow within that region. Until these things are removed and wiped out, maybe a fire or even a herbivore that comes through and eats them, they're going to kind of freeze in that particular stage. Another example that I can give you that you may see at home as well is with sunflower seeds. You put sunflower seeds, particularly black sunflower seeds, in your bird feeders, and as the birds eat them and they drop the seeds on the ground or the shells on the ground, there's actually an oil residue that's on those shells that begins to leach out into the soil underneath your bird feeder. And that's an inhibitor again. It does the same thing. It keeps germination from taking place. And you'll notice that under the bird feeder, the only thing that will sprout any seeds will be sunflower seeds. And it's keeping the other ones from germinating. The last factor is a little unique. I don't want to say it's tricky, but basically it is tolerance is the last thing. Tolerance is the ability for certain species to not wipe out earlier successional species, to allow them to coexist, so you get a little bit of mixing of phases. This explains why very often in mature ecosystems you'll see some late and some earlier successional species, not just the late ones. Most of the time it has to do with shading and light levels in that late successional stage where you have those shade-tolerant plants. If they really shade out the ground, then they're going to kill off any earlier successional species. If they actually allow some sunlight to still hit the forest floor, then you're still going to get your mid and your earlier successional species. So those are the three factors that kind of will affect which stage you're in. I think we'll talk real quickly about disturbances next time.